Path to War is a historical drama about the Johnson administration and the buildup in the Vietnam War from 1965 to 1968. I believe this is what you would call a docudrama, meaning it's not a documentary, it's a scripted drama, but it very closely follows the real history, or at least so I think. And if it doesn't, then I'm not smart enough to critique it. If anyone knows any historical inaccuracies in this film, please leave them in the comments down below. I'd be interested to know about them. It was made as a television movie for HBO in 2002, and I never even heard about it at the time. Probably because I was in Japan during those years and wasn't really plugged into what was going on, and the internet. I had limited internet access, and the internet then wasn't what the internet was now, etc. But I saw part of it about 4 years ago when staying in a hotel on a family vacation. And I immediately got sucked in because I'm a huge sucker for these things. I love historical docudramas, and I'm interested in the story of the Johnson administration and the Vietnam War. In fact, one of my, I think, favorite historical dramas of all time is the 2016 film All the Way, which is another docudrama about the Johnson administration. I love that one, and I guess I'm right in the target audience for this because I loved this one as well. Now, not everybody is in the target audience for these movies, but if you like history, if you like docudramas, if you like scenes of men sitting around a boardroom discussing politics and war, then this will be a good, interesting movie for you. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see the full movie at that time 4 years ago because we had to, I was with the wife and daughter, and we had an itinerary planned, and I was just watching it for a little bit of downtime in the hotel. I don't know, saw about maybe 40 minutes of it when I was in the hotel, and it's a long movie. It's how long is it? It's over 2 hours, 2 hours I think and 46 minutes. But I was intrigued by it, and I searched the internet to find out what the name of it was, and then I've been meaning to get back to it ever since. Track it down one of these days. And this week I've got some time with the wife and kids at my in-laws' house, and so I searched YouTube, and sure enough, there is a copy on YouTube. Now, I don't think it's there legally, and I don't know how long it's going to last up there. One indication that the person who uploaded it knows it's not there legally is they cut off the beginning and the ending credits, which I assume is some way to avoid the bots, although I don't know how that helps, but it must help because that's the only reason I can think of to do that. I'll leave a link to of it in the description down below. You can check it out if you're interested. It's not entirely legal, I don't believe, but it's on YouTube at the moment. And like I said, I certainly found it was fascinating. I mentioned the other LBJ drama movie, All the Way, which came out in 2016, so 14 years after this movie came out. But in a weird sort of way, this seems to act as a sequel to All the Way, even though it came out 14 years before All the Way. But All the Way ends with Johnson's reelection in 1964, and the path to war starts up exactly with Johnson's reelection in 1964 and carries us through Johnson's second term. Both movies show how Johnson was under a lot of pressure from different factions, and how he did his best to balance them, and how he was an extraordinary deal maker. But in Path to War, obviously the Vietnam War is taking precedence. In All the Way, it was mostly focused on the passage of the Civil Rights Act. and the Vietnam War was just something that was quietly happening in the background, as I think is true to history. It was not something that was occupying a lot of the nation's attention or the Johnson's attention. There were other things going on. But now here in Path to War, the focus is on the Vietnam War. There is a bit of the civil rights part in the middle of the movie as Johnson is trying to deal with the Vietnam War, but he's also getting pressure from Martin Luther King, and there's some march in Selma, Alabama, and what's his name? George Wallace. An interesting little bit of crossover here. George Wallace in this movie is played by Gary Sinise, who also played George Wallace in a TV movie in the 90s, which I actually saw about half of when it came out in the 1990s, or at least I saw some of it on TV at the time. And I guess they had the same director, producer and director, so it's a little bit of a crossover between the George Wallace biopic and Path to War, because Gary Sinise is playing George Wallace in both movies. But then we get Vietnam just taking center focus. Now, it's an interesting movie because it dramatizes the various conflicts that were taking place in Johnson's staff and cabinet. And if you're enough of a history geek to be interested in this, it's interesting. I actually, when I was in college, I took a course on the American War in Vietnam. And I remember the professor talking about some of these figures. The professor gave a lecture in which he listed different people in Johnson's cabinet and what their positions were. I vaguely remember him talking about George Ball, who is a prominent figure in the Path to War docudrama. George Ball was a staunch opponent of the Vietnam War from within Johnson's cabinet. I mean, he never went public. These were just inside the cabinet meetings. But he was always against it. And I remember my professor saying that his consistency of opposition was both a strength and a weakness. It was a strength in the fact that he was never afraid to go against the flow with the rest of the cabinet. But it was a weakness in the sense that he became pigeonholed into that role. That it was just like, oh yeah, here's George Ball. Of course he's going to be opposed to it. And after a while, the professor said they kind of stopped taking his objections seriously. This movie does an excellent job of dramatizing that. And it made me think that if this movie had been around in the 90s when I was taking that college course on the American War in Vietnam, it would have been such a great educational tool. Because the professor, he went through and he talked about these names. They all came up in his lecture, I think. But after the lecture, I didn't remember half the names he said, and by the next day it was mostly just gone. I remember little fragments of it, but to have a drama like this, where you can put a face to the name, even if it's not their real face, even if it's an actor's face, kind of see it dramatized, it's a great educational tool. And again, I'm going to assume that this movie is more or less historically accurate. If it's not historically accurate, I don't know where it's going wrong. Although I do note maybe a couple things that are missing from it. And again, correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but the drama in the movie is all about the bombing of North Vietnam and the escalation of North Vietnam. The bombing of South Vietnam, or the military buildup in South Vietnam, is barely mentioned. So the movie is almost portraying this as if it's a war between the North and the South, which in one theater it was, but there was also a homegrown insurgency inside the South. That was the Viet Cong, which is mostly ignored by this movie. And there were also, I believe, a lot of bombings inside South Vietnam, which again is mostly ignored by this movie. Um, and yeah, I mean, the other thing that this movie briefly acknowledges but doesn't spend a lot of time on is just how unstable the regime in Saigon was. Now, the coup happened in '63, so that was during Kennedy's administration. But I believe there was a series of strongmen during the Johnson administration, and there was when was the election in South Vietnam? Was that in '68? That when Johnson made such a big deal about having a free and open election in South Vietnam, desperately trying to prop up the idea that this was a democracy. I, yeah, I'm no expert myself, but I think the movie is just doesn't focus on that, which is fair enough because you can't focus on everything, not even in a 2 hour and 45 minute movie. So, although it is leaving stuff out, it's a very interesting dramatization of what the movie is showing, and I think it would be a perfect educational tool, not only because it would help the history student get straight who all these people in Johnson's cabinet are, but it's a very valuable history lesson just in terms of the lessons of history, like how an administration can get sucked into an unwinnable war by a series of compromises or a series of bad decisions which gradually build on each other. And the movie does a very good job of creating that narrative. And there's a tragedy here, which, again, I'm reminded of the words of my professor from that course I took in college all those years ago, who said the real tragedy of the Vietnam War, at least from Johnson's perspective, is Johnson wanted to focus on the Great Society. He didn't want to focus on the Vietnam War. But the war just got bigger and bigger until it just consumed his presidency. And you can see that very clearly in this movie. Johnson does not want to get dragged into this unwinnable war. The reason he commits more and more is because the military, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, are telling him, if you commit more, we can win this war in a year. Just agree to more bombing, send more troops, we'll have it all wrapped up in the next 18 months. And then this ulcer in your foreign policy will be gone, and you can concentrate on your domestic agenda. And that's what Johnson was believing when he was committing more and more troops to this. So but as we all know from history, what happened is he just got stuck deeper and deeper into the quagmire. So there's a temptation to feel sorry for Johnson in this, and almost all of the characters in here come up as sympathetic, even though their actions were incredibly destructive. Nobody is pure evil in this movie. Everybody thinks that they're doing right. But their fault is, I guess, where maybe this comes under the banality of evil. They view the world like a chess game. So they are thinking in terms of victories and winning wars, and the human cost is an afterthought to them. How easily can we win this war? What is the world opinion going to be? What is the American public opinion going to be? There is some agonizing over the human cost of the bombings that they are doing, but it's very secondary to them. They have gotten into these positions of power because they've lost empathy with the people that their decisions are affecting, or at least that's one of the morals I take away from watching this movie. Not bad people, but incredibly destructive policies because they were thinking about this as a game of chess on the world stage. The film ends with Nixon halting the bombing and hoping for a peace talk with the North Vietnam. And the copy I watched on YouTube, because they cut out right before the ending credits, there's a little scroll of information that they don't show. But you can find that elsewhere on YouTube if you just go to the ending of the Path to War, and I'll link both videos in the description down below. But on the ending, there's a little bit of text that scrolls up that says that the peace talks were actually unsuccessful, and Nixon ended up getting elected in 1968. What they don't say there, this is another thing that gets left out, is that the peace talks were unsuccessful because Nixon sabotaged them. Nixon told the North Vietnamese to reject the offer that Johnson put on the table, and he said, "You'll get a better offer with me," because Nixon wanted the war as a campaign issue. Now, this was, I believe, widely suspected in 2002, but not officially declassified yet. Now it's officially declassified. So that may be one of the reasons it wasn't mentioned in this documentary, aside from the fact that you just can't cover everything. But one of the reasons that we know about it is because Johnson had Hoover bugging Nixon's men, spying on Nixon's men, which is one of the reasons why Johnson couldn't go public with what he knew about how Richard Nixon had sabotaged the peace negotiations. And the fact that Johnson does have Hoover bugging everybody does come through in this movie. So maybe that was the writer's way of hinting at what the outcome was, that they hinting about what they couldn't say publicly yet about how it was widely suspected that Nixon had sabotaged the peace talks. There's maybe a lot more to say on this movie in terms of recapping a lot of the events that took place, but I think I'll just let you watch the movie for yourself. If you haven't seen it already, and if you're interested in this kind of stuff, try and track this one down. It's a real interesting one. If that link on YouTube is still working, you can make that your first port of call. It could be one place to watch the movie. It's very fascinating.